Elias Thorne stared at the deed in his calloused hands, barely believing what he had just done. $75. That was all he had left in the world after the bank took his family farm, his truck, and his dignity. And he had spent it on 6 acres of rocky, dried-out scrubland that the locals called the Devil's Dustpan. The auctioneer had laughed when Elias raised his hand. Sold to the dreamer in the back. He'd shouted, and the room had erupted in mocking applause. No one wanted that land. It had no water rights, no fertile soil, and was rumored to be cursed since the mining company abandoned it 50 years ago. But Elias didn't see a curse. He saw a place to hide. At 62 years old, with arthritic knees and a heart broken by the loss of his wife, Martha, he just wanted a patch of dirt where he could park his old camper and wait for the end. He felt as worthless as the land he now owned. The first night on the property was brutal. The wind howled through the canyons like a dying animal, shaking the thin walls of his camper. Elias sat in the dark, eating a cold can of beans, wondering if he should have just used the $75 for a bus ticket to anywhere else. Morn brought a harsh, unforgiving sun that baked the red clay until it cracked. Elias stepped out to survey his kingdom of dust. There were no trees, only twisted sagebrush and piles of mining debris. "Well, Martha," he whispered to the sky, "it ain't paradise, but it's ours." He spent the first week clearing rocks by hand, trying to create a small garden patch. It was backbreaking, pointless work. The ground was so hard it bent his shovel. Every strike of the metal against the stone felt like a reminder of his failure. He was a farmer without a farm, a husband without a wife. On the 7th day, Elias heard a sound that didn't belong in the dead silence of the desert. It was the sound of heavy breathing, ragged and wet. He grabbed his old rifle, thinking it might be a mountain lion or a coyote. He crept around the side of a large boulder, finger on the trigger. What he saw made him lower the gun. It wasn't a predator. It was a skeleton wrapped in horsehide. A gray mare, so emaciated that her hip bones jutted out like knife blades, stood swaying in the heat. Her head hung low, her mane was a matted mess of burrs, and her eyes were clouded with despair. She didn't run when she saw him. She didn't have the strength. She just looked at him, and then, with a groan that sounded terrifyingly human, her legs buckled. She collapsed into the dust with a heavy thud, kicking feebly as she tried and failed to rise again. Elias knew he should walk away. He barely had enough water for himself, let alone a 1,000-pound animal. A bullet would be a mercy. It would end her suffering instantly. He raised the rifle again, aiming for a spot behind her ear. His finger tightened on the trigger. But then she blinked. In that blink, Elias saw something that stopped his heart. He saw the same look Martha had in her eyes during her final days in the hospital. A look that said, "I'm scared, but I'm not ready to go." He cursed under his breath, lowered the rifle, and ran to his camper. He returned with a bucket of his precious water and an old towel. He knelt in the dirt beside the fallen mare, not caring about the ticks or the smell of decay. "Easy, girl," he murmured, his voice cracking from disuse. "I ain't gonna hurt you. Drink." She drank greedily, splashing water over his hands. When the bucket was empty, she rested her heavy head on his thigh. Elias sat there for hours in the scorching sun, stroking her neck, feeling the faint, thready beat of her heart against his leg. He named her Hope, because it was the only thing they both needed. For the next month, Elias's life revolved around Hope. He shared his meager rations of oatmeal and beans with her until he could afford a bag of cheap feed. He walked 5 miles to the nearest creek every day to haul water, his old joints screaming in protests. The locals in town started talking. "Crazy Elias," they called him, starving himself for a dead horse on dead land. But Elias didn't care. As Hope grew stronger, filling out her ribs and lifting her head, Elias felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. He wasn't just waiting to die anymore. He was needed. Juan Ivini. While grooming Hope's coat, which was turning from a dull gray to a shimmering silver, Elias noticed something strange. Hope kept pawing at a specific spot near the back of the property, right at the base of a rocky cliff face. She would dig, snort, and look back at him, as if trying to tell him something. "What is it, girl?" Elias asked, walking over. The ground there was different. It was darker, damper. Hope pawed again, her hoof striking rock with a hollow clack. Elias knelt and touched the soil. It was cool. Wet. His heart skipped a beat. He grabbed his pickaxe and started digging where Hope had indicated. 1 foot down, 2 feet. His muscles burned, But Hope stood over him, nudging his shoulder with her nose, encouraging him. Achi 3 feet, the pickaxe hit something hard, and a hiss of air escaped the ground. Then came the water. It didn't trickle. It burst forth. A geyser of crystal-clear ice-cold water shot into the air, soaking Elias and making Hope dance back with a startled whinny. Elias sat in the mud, laughing and crying at the same time. In the middle of the driest county in the state, he had struck an artesian well, but water was just the beginning. The force of the water had washed away a layer of topsoil and clay from the cliff face. As the sun set, its dying rays hit the wet rock, and something sparkled. Not the fool's gold that miners had chased for decades. This was different. It was a vein of deep, iridescent blue. Elias, hands trembling, chipped a piece of the blue rock loose. He wasn't a geologist, but he knew what raw turquoise looked like. And not just any turquoise, this was spiderweb turquoise with a rare, intricate black matrix. It was incredibly valuable. The worthless land was sitting on a fortune. He kept the discovery quiet, but secrets are hard to keep in a small town. When he went to the general store to buy premium horse feed and a new truck, paying in cash with a nugget he'd sold to a jeweler in the city, eyes started watching him, especially the eyes of Jed Raker. Jed was the town's wealthiest land developer, the man who had bought Elias's family farm for pennies on the dollar. He was a shark in a cowboy hat. When he heard about the water and the blue stones on the old mining land, he realized he had made a mistake letting Elias buy it for $75. A week later, a black SUV pulled up to Elias's camper. Jed stepped out, smiling a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Elias, my friend, I see you've turned this dust bowl around. I'm here to make you an offer. $10,000 for the lot, cash, today." Elias patted Hope's neck, who was standing beside him. Ears pinned back at Jed. "Not for sale. Jed, this is our home." Jed's smile vanished. "Look at you, old man. You're living in a tin can. 10,000 is a fortune for someone like you. Don't be stupid. You have no water rights filed. I can make your life hell." "I filed the water rights yesterday," Elias said calmly, pulling a document from his pocket. "And the mineral rights came with the deed." "Read the fine print, Jed. It's all mine." Jed turned red, climbed back into his SUV, and slammed the door. "Watch your back, Elias," he shouted. Accidents happen in the desert. That night, Elias didn't sleep. He sat on his porch with his rifle, Hope standing guard by the fence. The mare seemed to sense the danger. She patrolled the perimeter, her ears swiveling like radar dishes. Elias realized she wasn't just a pet. She was his partner, his protector. 2 nights later, the accident happened. Elias woke to the smell of smoke. Someone had thrown a Molotov cocktail at his camper. He stumbled out, coughing, the heat searing his back. But the fire wasn't the only threat. The gate to the corral was open. "Hoppy was gone." "Hope!" Elias screamed, ignoring the flames consuming his home. He ran into the darkness, his flashlight beam cutting through the smoke. Tire tracks led away from the property. They had taken her. Jed knew the land mattered less to Elias than the horse. It was leverage. Elias didn't call the sheriff. Jed owned the sheriff. He grabbed his rifle from the burning camper, jumped into his new truck, and followed the tire tracks. They led straight to Jed Raker's massive ranch. Elias wasn't a violent man, but that night, he was a father coming for his child. He found Hope in a small, reinforced round pen behind Jed's main barn. She was frantic, pacing and calling out. 2 of Jed's hired hands were leaning on the fence, laughing. "Boss says we sell her to the glue factory tomorrow," one said. "Teach the old man a lesson." Elias didn't wait. He drove his truck straight through the wooden fence of the ranch, with splintering like matchsticks. The hired hands scattered. Elias jumped out, heafling hand. "Open the gate," he roared. The men, seeing the look in his eyes, didn't argue. They unlatched the pen and ran. Hope rushed to him, nearly knocking him over, burying her head in his chest. But before they could leave, floodlights blinded them. Jed Raker stood on the barn balcony, a shotgun in his hands. "Trespassing and destruction of property. Elias, I can shoot you legally right now." Elias shielded Hope with his body. "You burned my home, Jed. You stole my horse. You think a jury won't see through your lies? Jed cocked the shotgun. "Dead men don't testify, Elias, and dead horses tell no tales." But Jed had forgotten one thing, the layout of his own ranch. Behind the round pen was the irrigation canal for his prize alfalfa fields. And Hope, with her uncanny sense for water, smelled something Elias didn't. She suddenly reared, not in fear, but in command, and kicked out at the control valve on the canal pipe. The valve, old and rusty, sheared off. A high-pressure jet of water exploded outward, hitting the barn balcony supports. The wood, already rotten from years of neglect, groaned and snapped. The balcony collapsed, sending Jed tumbling into a pile of manure and mud below. His shotgun discharged harmlessly into the air. Elias stared in shock. Hope had literally brought the house down. He quickly loaded the mare into his trailer while Jed sputtered and cursed in the filth. As they drove away, Elias looked in the rearview mirror. The king of the county was covered in mud, defeated by a worthless horse and an old farmer. The next morning, Elias drove straight to the state police headquarters, bypassing the local sheriff. He had dashcam footage of the fire at his place and the confrontation at Jedsy's. The evidence was irrefutable. Jed Raker was arrested for arson, grand theft, and attempted murder. With Jed in prison, his empire crumbled. His assets were seized, and his ranch was put up for auction. In a twist of poetic justice, Elias used the money from his first major turquoise sale to buy his old family farm Bakhta, one Jed had stolen from him years ago. But he didn't move back there. He gave the farm to a young couple just starting out, charging them exactly $75. "Pass it on," he told them. Elias stayed on his 6 acres of worthless land, which was now a green oasis. Thanks to the mine became known as the Silver Hope Mine, producing some of the finest turquoise in the world. But Elias didn't hoard the wealth. He built a sanctuary, a place for unwanted horses and unwanted people. Old folks with no family, veterans with PTSD, kids who didn't fit in, they came to the desert oasis to heal. And at the center of it all was Hope. She wasn't just a horse anymore, she was the matriarch. She moved among the broken people with a gentle grace, knowing exactly who needed a nudge, who needed a laugh, and who just needed to cry and to remain. Scientists later came to study they said it was a geological anomaly, a miracle aquifer that shouldn't exist in that rock formation. They asked Elias how he found it when modern surveys had missed it for decades. Elias just smiled and pointed to the silver mare grazing by the water. "I didn't find anything," he said. "I just listened. Most people are too busy trying to conquer the land to hear what it's saying. But a hungry horse, she hears the heartbeat of the earth." Years later, when Elias finally passed away in his sleep, sitting on his porch watching the sunset, they found a will in his pocket. He left everything to the Hope Foundation, but the most important line was at the bottom. Never underestimate the value of something broken. It just needs a little water and a little love to shine. Hope lived to be 35, a ripe old age for a horse that had once been a skeleton. On the day she died, the artesian well reportedly stopped flowing for an hour, as if the earth itself was holding its breath in mourning before starting again with renewed vigor. Today, if you visit the sanctuary, you'll see a statue in the garden. It's not of Elias, and it's not of the turquoise. It's a statue of a skinny gray May drinking from a bucket held by a kneeling old man. The inscription reads, "The $75 miracle. The locals don't call it the Devil's Dustpan anymore. They call it Ilias's Garden. And they say that on quiet nights." If you listen closely to the wind in the canyons, you can hear a man humming a tune and the soft, rhythmic hoofbeats of a horse patrolling the perimeter, guarding the hope they built together. Sometimes, the things the world throws away are the very keys to the kingdom. Elias saved a horse because he saw himself in her. In return, she gave him the world. It's a reminder that kindness is never a wasted investment, even when it costs your last $75. So the next time you feel worthless, or you see something that looks broken beyond repair, remember the farmer and his hungry horse. Remember that underneath the dust and the scars, there might be a river of life waiting to burst forth. You just have to be willing to dig